Africa is evidently confronted with a crime problem. Our criminal justice system is simply not working. Crime, though, is out of hand, and the police is increasingly trying to find its way out of this problem. However, the manner in which they do so is what we discuss on today's show. How criminalized have our criminal justice system become? This is our program for today. Workers' World starts now.
From England to Poland, every step across the ocean, the ruling classes, them is in a mess. Oh yes, the capitalist system a regress, but the Soviet system now progress. So which one of them you think is best?
Welcome to the weekly Workers' World Labour Show. I am your host, Tashariq Trubody. We have an exciting conversation today, though it's grim in its nature. That is something that we want to get into. My name is Tashariq Trubody. Let's get into it. Our weekly Labour Show. I'm your host. Now, on the 16th of August this year, the 10th anniversary of the Marikana Massacre happened. And despite the Farlam Commission's report on the massacre and the recommendations to prevent fatalities due to the police's action, we will experience police brutality in South Africa, with protesters being killed, such as in Tembisa recently, and hundreds dying in police custody. Moreover, police continue to be particularly brutal in response to community protests and strikes. Joining us to discuss this, we'll get into it after the insert brought to us now by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
Police are called for protection, protect. The police are called ayathanda because eyeliner nezinto politics. We understand. So brutalization could better efuna into yakhe ilungelo lakhe.
The route to an effective solution is the admission that there is a problem.
So the police, they came. When we were near to our destination, they threw us with a stun grenade. There were truck of water, too many police soldiers.
We condemn to the fullest any form of police brutality.
You've reached the police department's voicemail. Pay close attention to whine about us not doing anything to solve a problem that you created. Press 1.
It was a peaceful march. We were having children, pregnant people, old people. So the police, they came. When we were near to our destination, they threw us with a stun grenade. There were truck of water, too many police soldiers, and they even abused an old man who stays here with us, an 80-old-year man.
Amapolisa brutalization yabo zange abena approach right because akhaba icala. So fish babezokwenza icrime. So ke ngoko akunothi ndihlamba endlini bese ngibona abantu bengena bengakhange banqonqoze ngalendlela office yonke lanto ngalendlela engayo andizuyicacisa ezibake ngoku abantu beyazi.
We disagree that South African police are brutal, and that is clearly informed by that when we are saying that they are not brutal, it is informed clearly by that there may be few incidents where there's something that is described that falls under the description of brutality.
So the internal disciplinary process doesn't show much accountability, and I believe it's perhaps one of the reasons why the public has lost why the police rather have lost public trust. It's through lack of accountability, lack of transparency. We also know that annually hundreds of people die in police custody or die as a result of police misconduct. So in terms of accountability, it's very seldom that police are actually held accountable for their human rights violations.
If you go to report anything concerning a government in South Africa, you are just wasting your time. Nothing is going to be done about that. Our voices are not heard anymore especially we black people, our voices are not heard. Whatever you can say, whatever you can do, you will just be wasting your time. For instance, in Cape Town Top Deck, I have a container there. In Cape Town Top Deck, there is so many people dealing with drugs there, selling drugs as if they are selling sweets on the street. The police know about that. The only thing they do, they just collect money from them.
The community is talking about the problem of corruption in general within the state departments that are supposed to be dealing with the problem that is experienced in the space. There's a lack of trust between the community and those who are supposed to be providing the service to the people in terms of stopping the problem or the crisis that we're finding ourselves in.
Let those recommendations be fully implemented. Capacitate POP. Ensure that even training at POP is enhanced. Ensure that there's enough resources. Then on its own, when you have even more members, 2 members are not going to do duties that are supposed to be performed by 20 more members. They would be able to manage. And if you are able to manage a situation, there is nowhere where a member can panic. And out of that panic, you find that there is something that is untoward that may occur because they are trying to contain the situation, but they are outnumbered.
I believe NGOs need to work alongside communities and the police officers. I don't think it's something that one organ of state can fix. I believe it will take a collaborative effort between communities, between NGOs, and between the police, because violence affects us all. We are all afraid to walk alone at night. We're all afraid to even walk out during the day because anything can happen at any point. So I believe in integrating ways of doing things, but also I believe that NGOs can also look at policy reform. So how do we improve our policies? How do we ensure that our policies are creating safer communities and safer environments?
All right, so there we heard it. Police brutality is quite evident in South Africa, and we have to go back as not too far, 2012, with what happened in Marikana. But there is a legacy issue here, and it goes back, just before the days of democracy in this country, when apartheid set in and set the tone for police brutality, which often is not looked at as sufficiently as it should. But let's get into this conversation now. I have a great panel of guests with us. Lisiba Tumakale, the national spokesperson for the South African Policing Union. We also have Aldred de Klerk. He's a senior associate for the African Centre for Security and Intelligence Praxis. Danel Kutse is the editor and journalist at Viewfinder. He is also with us. Thank you so very much for having joined us. I'd like to start with you, Lisiba, as a representative from the South African Policing Union. How in the context of policing, is brutality understood? Do we know what it means? What an expression of brutality is?
Thank you so much for having us. From our perspective, brutality clearly is described in many forms. Unfortunately, brutality is only considered when members, there happen to be allegations against members to say there was a specific conduct where maybe an alleged perpetrator or an alleged member of the community is saying that the police mistreated him or her in one way or another. But we need to look at the history of our country. Our country is a violent country, informed clearly by the history that we are coming from. When we are saying that our country is violent due to the history, we are referring to the country at large, not in terms of the police. So that on its own, the history that we have, clearly it makes everybody to be prone to any form of violence. We have seen the violence against the police. We have seen even today, in the news in terms of what is happening in Gauteng, in terms of illegal mining. You see how community members themselves, they happen to be so violent in terms of trying to address issues that they are dealing with.
But on,
So
but on the flip side of this, there's also the violence that citizens feel is meted out against them. And I want to get Aldred very quickly on this particular matter, because there is a general sense of distrust and mistrust that exists between communities and the police, and that in many arguments, it festers this sort of attitude, Aldred.
Indeed, and just to pick up on the point that what has been made is that the police is very much a reflection of society, and police is very much part of society. They suffer from the same stresses and trauma, and they suffer from the same dysfunction and dislocation. And unfortunately, in that context, the police as an institution has let themselves down, and it's the public leadership, both at a political level and an institutional level, who has let the members down, because they've not set in place clear operational and strategic objectives that actually assist the members to make wise decisions around the use of force. They have not also ensured that there's a structured, competent command that guide the members and actually ensure that they are able to do the right thing, because the environment is conducive to doing the right thing. So part of this legacy issue is, in fact, the culture of policing, as you already said, that dates back many decades, and we have not done much to change that culture of policing, unfortunately.
And I want to look at the younger ones that are coming into the system and whether our training modules speak to that. I'll come to that a bit later. But Danelle, some of your introductory remarks. I mean, South Africa is in line with world practice. So when it comes to having an oversight body, we have an independent police investigative directorate, we have a policing oversight committee within Parliament. Do you think that these organs that support what policing generally tries to do, that it is protection enough for citizens against brutality?
And a motif in South Africa that structures in place within government, within Parliament, in the form of the police watchdog IPID, that is able to mete out impartial and impactful investigations when misconduct, brutality, often very serious crimes are reported against police officers. I've been looking at the data, the systems, the procedures of the police watchdog for a number of years now through investigative and data analysis methods. And I think overwhelmingly what the findings of that investigation has shown me is that this is in fact an obfuscation of the reality that the IPID is a convenient institution for the police to point to as an oversight body, but in actual fact, police oversight in this country is completely beholden to the management structures of the police. I say that because IPID's investigations, the police watchdog's investigations, are only as impactful as they are enforced by both the National Prosecuting Authority and by police management itself. And what our investigation at Viewfinder has shown time and again is, in light of this overwhelming number of misconduct, violent misconduct allegations that are reported against the police in the thousands every year, sometimes exceeding 10,000, in light of that, there is an overwhelming deficit in terms of both investigative capacity of IPID, but also when these cases are investigated. And
even from the numbers that we know, Danelle, because 80 rape incidents, 256 incidents of torture, these are the cases we know of. What is it that we don't know of? We'll get into that and more after the break.
Before we continue, here is what you can expect in this week's news bulletin. SAFTU will embark on a national strike on the 24th of August over rising costs. Salt Rock faces continuous attacks from the Kwadukuza municipality. 115,000 fed-up US Freight Railroad workers are mobilizing for a possible national strike. And Ukrainian Parliament adopted draft law 5371, which abolished labor rights for 94% of Ukrainian workers. For more, stay tuned for the full bulletin. To continue this week's topic of discussion on police brutality, here's Tashriq.
Thanks there to Michaela Miller. She'll join us a bit later for the news as well. We're talking about crime in this country, but more so police brutality. We sit with some very disturbing figures. Let me run through what some of the IPID reports suggest. 353 deaths due to police's action. We're looking at 217 deaths in police custody, a shocking 80 incidents of rape, and looking at almost 4,000, almost 300 cases of assault by the police. And Aldred, these are the numbers we know of. How many more is there that we simply don't know of? And I think this already is a very worrying trend that we sit with. How does this stack up against cases elsewhere in the world? Is this by any standard in line with what, I don't want to call international practice, but the observations being made internationally?
Well, those numbers, unfortunately, in terms of rape and murder, police shootings that result in death should and are investigated internationally, and that's probably a good yardstick. We are not far off countries like the US, but then we need to look at size of population, we need to look at number of police officers, but then in relation to statistics in Europe, well, we do very badly. In relation to former British colonial countries like Australia and New Zealand and Canada, we fare very badly. But then in terms of Bangladesh and India, which were also former British countries, and Northern Ireland and the like, we're probably comparable per size of population. The worrying thing about this, and I think this is where part of this discussion goes to, is that IPID should be able to independently seek prosecution based on evidence flowing from their investigations. So they should be able to independently approach the national prosecuting authority and institute cases, and simply on the more serious matters, be able to just give notice to police management that they are going to proceed with opening up a case directly with the National Prosecuting Authority. That is something in law that should happen.
And that's a crucial point, because if one looks at the United States model where the 1PP exists, they can go after errant police officers directly. In this instance, IPID is sometimes, and as our history in recent times have demonstrated, can become quite political. We remember the infamous Robert McBride and the sort of sing and dance that happened there, because it always hinges on some sort of condemnation from management of the South African police services. So do you believe that a reform to the legislation, Aldred, just to stay with you very quickly, on this point, do you think that sort of reform and independence must be enshrined within the law?
Absolutely. So too, IPID's budget should be controlled by IPID and not by the South African Police Service. Even though their budget is ring-fenced, they don't really have full control over that. And somebody like Robert McBride and the IPID could not, for example, fully investigate Scene 2 at Marikana because they couldn't get a mere 5 million rand. That is hugely problematic. And when we say that IPID in that sense has become political, well, that's for the courts to test when they bring a case on the basis of evidence. Political, does that mean that behest and the beheading, and at the interest of a few people? Well, let's test that then. That doesn't preclude us from actually making sure that they're an independent body.
Yeah. Danielle, on this sense, do you think that, there is sufficient oversight? Because the point you were making a bit earlier, that, the cases are still, though, worrying, and it doesn't appear that we are clawing our way back from the type of cases of brutality that we witness in this country. There's a big culture issue here as well.
Absolutely. But just to dovetail off the point Aldred was making, I think, a government's priorities can be seen in where treasury and money is spent. And I think it is unequivocally a fact that IPID is woefully under-resourced to cover both the distances, the jurisdictions, and the complexity of many of these crimes, the challenges of investigating police officers who are masterminds of the criminal justice system and of obfuscating the crimes that they might have committed. And so certainly, apart from just a political concern around IPID's independence and whether it answers to the police minister, who in this country has been very much aligned with the structure and the institution of the police service itself as the political figurehead, there's a question of resourcing and there's a question of prioritization within our state. And I think that it shows us that police oversight is not taken seriously throughout the structures of the government. So a question of culture, certainly there is, in this environment of failing oversight and impunity that gets fostered through it, that there's an opening and an opportunity for cultural trends to find an ascendancy within the police service, for brazen officers that are prone to breaking the law to become emboldened and to be able to influence the culture at the station level, in the full knowledge that there is very little chance of proper accountability and oversight if they happen to err on the wrong side of the law in often trying to execute their duties.
Yeah. Lisiba, you're the most closest to police officers in this country. Why do you feel South Africans get the sense that there is almost a culture of impunity amongst police officers? And given the challenges with IPID and its current structure and its limitations, that police officers feel that they are almost empowered to act in an almost suppressive manner?
We don't believe that police officers believe that, they are above the law or they are the law unto themselves. Where you have specific incidents, IPID will get involved because they're empowered in terms of the law. And I'm glad that the two panelists, they have outlined challenges that IPID is facing. But the very same challenges that IPID is facing, like the issue of being under-resourced, they also fall into the police, where our members, they will be plunged into a service delivery protest. And within that service delivery protest, they don't have enough resources for themselves to ensure that they are able to really deal with that protest. And on top of that, it goes to physical resources. It goes further even into the issue of even the human capital. We've seen with what happened in Marikana, where the issue of the POP are being under-resourced, and in terms of the human capital and also in terms of fiscal resources. So those factors also, they play quite a negative role, where our members whom are facing a crowd that is more than them, and they're expected to deal with that crowd. They're expected to manage it. The case of Mudumba, it was one of an example that we could use, where we have seen during the vets protest there, the issue of under-resourced and so on. It really played that role, the lack of communication amongst
But
themselves.
Lisiba, I understand that. But the problem is, if you look at in the case of Marikana, there may have been under-policing and the public order policing wasn't effective enough. But who comes to a scene like that with live bullets and order police stations, or rather ambulances, for instance? Why, for instance, in the Andries Tatane matter, we see such a heavy approach? There are so many case studies where there is somebody at a command level that don't quite know conflict resolution.
If we look at issues like that, unfortunately, the police, they always find themselves to be in the firing line, where, an example in terms of service delivery protest, there will be issues that has to do with service delivery. And those issues not being addressed, at the end of the day, becomes the problem of the police. And the issue, where I'm referring to the report, the panel of experts report into Marikana, it points out to the issue of communication, which you are clearly pointing out, to say there is no clear communication, line of command between the commander and the members, because during a protest might start with 5 people. At the end of the day, it's 100 people who are running different ways and distracting in different ways. So if those issues are really outlined and there's a clear communication between the members and also those who are giving a line of command.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that line of command, communication, training and development, and also that communication with communities. We'll jump into all of that once we return from the break. We are talking about police brutality, though the challenge is a universal one, and there's a legacy issue in South Africa. But how do we go about addressing this? And Aldred, I want to pick up with you as we start this segment, because looking at the cases in the United States, there we don't just sit with pure police brutality. There's an argument that you have an undertone of racism. And if one compares the two, or even other parts of the world, what drives, the type of police brutality that we see? Is it ingrained racism? Is it power? Is it impunity? Are there themes, sub-themes to understanding police brutality?
Well, as a legacy police of British post-colonialism, we do find elements of classism. So we do find that the police, by its nature, polices the underclass significantly different to it polices the privileged class. So that is something that we have to address in this country, and it's a legacy issue that has to be addressed throughout our economic and political structure. And it also has to do with where people live and how people live, for example. So that is something that we have to pick up on. Just to get back to the Sabbath issue about a command and the issue of command and control, we do tend to send our police officers out into the world and onto a routine shift with the belief that they can do everything and be everything to everybody. No, they can't. Policing by its definition requires other institutions to do its job, and the weakest institutions is that of local government. And then we have lack of family and community organization and structures that can also come to the bar. But let's stay with policing, for example, and let's stay with this issue of command and brutality. The single member, when it comes to dealing with anything on his or her shift, has discretion as to how they're going to deal with whatever confronts them, whatever incident they confront them. When it comes to them acting in concord with other police officers, they do so and they use force under command. So we really have to look at the competencies, the structure, and the training of our commanders to be able to understand scenarios and to understand truly what de-escalation looks like. Police as an institution seems to have given up, and I'm going to say institution, I'm going to talk about the management and the leadership of the police, seems to have given up on the idea that police can prevent and that police can protect. Yet I just spent the afternoon revisiting all their prescripts, and it continues to hammer home to police about the proportionate use of force, understanding the circumstances which can stand, understanding the impact on communities, understanding the impact on police-community relations, and understanding how protection and prevention is primary to enforcement. Yet so what we have from the political class and the leadership class is something completely different, unfortunately. Sorry.
That's an important point, protection and de-escalation, because I want to understand, Danielle, just to pick up with you on this, whether we sit with a scenario where perhaps there is a difference in modality, a different in approach to policing. So perhaps the South African Police Service, through even some unplanned thinking, believes that if they were to become a bit softer, as they would appear to some, that crime would run amok. Perhaps we need a slightly tempered version from Beki Clele, shoot to kill.
Well, just on the issue of crowd management, a lot of my experience harks back to when I was a journalist doing beat field reporting of public order policing operations on the Cape Flats during protest and during civil unrest of various formats, and also in the Cape Town CBD. And certainly there was an element and an astonishment around how the prescripts and the standing orders that the police are supposed to act under emphasize de-escalation as the principle according to which public order operations should be conducted, and then the complete contradictory actions of police officers in those situations, which I have found to be, through anecdotal and personal experience, to have been significant factors in escalating violence and escalating tension in those situations. As to how the police see their own role and whether krachtdadigheid, whether a show of might and force in the face of the evidently high violent crime rates and the serious pressures that police officers act under, I think certainly there is an embattled tendency, a mentality within the police service, one of brotherhood and sisterhood, and a one of us and them. But for me, the most concerning crimes has been often when people are in custody, that is when we see a lot of torture allegations being leveled, a lot of unwarranted assault and misuse of force, which is almost vindictive in nature. And I think an overwhelming number of assault and torture cases within IPID's caseload speaks to a completely unwarranted misuse of force, which really cannot be explained within the paradigm of a needed show of force in the face of these kinds of threats and stresses that police officers face on the beat in the daily.
And I mean, and in addition to that, one can compound that question, which I want to put to you, Lisiba, about the variations in the approach, the krachtdadigheid that we see in certain circumstances when it approaches a protest, for instance. And I recall the instances during COVID, for instance, where many white middle-class individuals were protesting illegally so, but, were handled with kid gloves. We sit with cases where the police, for instance, would be less, determined to go into gang Cape Flats areas and to deal with crime in the way that the community would want them to deal with it. Why does it appear, at least from a perception perspective, Lesiba, that there is a divergence in the manner in which the police deals with different circumstances?
Unfortunately, the law that the police applies, the Criminal Procedure Act is one, and even the standing orders that Eldred was referring to, the ones that are protocols and even policies that are applicable within the police are one. And unfortunately, circumstances differ. Every case has its own merit. And those protests, definitely, you would find that they happen to be different, where the issue of discretion is the one that is being applicable at all times. But as from our perspective, the police at all times, they find themselves, in most cases, having a split of a second to make a decision on how to act in a specific situation. And that is not where most of the people find themselves working under such circumstances. So the issue of discretion really plays a role to say, what is it that is before you? What does it entail? How do you interpret that? And what is it that is necessary in terms of the use of force that is applicable under those reasonable circumstances in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act? But the law is the same. The members who are applying it are the members who went through the very same training within the police. And unfortunately, in most of those circumstances, we lose most of our police officers whom, when they lose their lives, no one talks about them, but everybody talks about everything. That is the unfortunate part there.
Well, I mean, yeah, that is evidently true, and something that perhaps we can pick up once we return from the break with Michaela Miller standing by with this week's Labour News.
A very warm welcome. You're watching Workers' World Labour News. Thanks for joining us. The South African Federation of Trade Unions has announced that it will embark on a national strike on the 24th of August across South Africa, protesting against the rising costs of living, load shedding and other economic challenges. This was decided by SAFTU at the Working Class Summit in Boksburg on Friday. SAFTU President Ruth Ntlekotse, who addressed the Working Class Summit, said the working class faced unprecedented economic pressures from rising costs, including the inflation rate, electricity tariffs, fuel prices and food costs. She lamented the country's expanded 45.6% unemployment rate disproportionately felt young South Africans with 2 million job losses as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. SAFTU and its social partners will hold several events in the run-up to the national strike. The Kwadukuza municipality in KwaZulu-Natal is persisting in trying to render people from the settlement in Salt Rock homeless. They have filed to evict the poor who have nowhere to go. This comes after the municipality filed an application to evict, which was successfully challenged by residents. On Tuesday, the community was attacked by police who raided their homes and beat up people in the community. The police attack on Nkanini in March resulted in Siyabonga Bankele being murdered and the police wore masks, so that their faces could not be seen. These actions are reminiscent of the apartheid era policing, where black people were completely dehumanized, attacked and killed with impunity, says the people of Salt Rock. In the USA, after waiting over 2 years to secure a new union contract and still reeling from the impacts of Wall Street ordered cost-cutting measures, 115,000 fed-up workers who operate the nation's freight rail works are inching closer towards a strike, which could come as soon as September. The rail workers from multiple craft unions gathered with allies in Galesburg, Illinois, to signal the federal government and major rail carriers that are ready for a shutdown. The rail unions are currently negotiating in lockstep at the bargaining table to try to maximize the leverage, seeking raises that keep up with inflation, lower health costs, and expanded paid leave. And lastly, in Ukraine, on the 19th of July, the Ukrainian parliament passed 2 new anti-worker and union measures on labor liberalization, prompting fears of Ukrainians losing workplace rights permanently as Russia's war puts a huge pressure on the country's economy. In 2 laws passed on, MPs voted to legalize 0 hours contracts and made moves towards moving up to 70% of the country's workforce from the protections guaranteed by the national labor law. Ukrainian trade unions actively opposed this anti-labor draft law for 2 years. But despite many warnings from the International Trade Union Confederation, the European Trade Union Confederation, and the International Labour Organization, the Ukrainian parliament adopted it. Law 5371 abolishes labor rights for 94% of the Ukrainian workers. Well, that's all from my side. If you have any story you'd like to share with us, you can simply send us an email to labor@wwmp.org.za. Tashrik is standing by to continue this week's topic of discussion.
Thanks there to Michaela with this week's Labour News. Let's wrap up our conversation and try to understand where we are in the training sphere. Now, before I get to training, though, Aldred, let's pick up on what Liseba had to say. You know, it's a tricky environment. Decisions are made very quickly. Things can go wrong very quickly. Police officers are also in the firing line. They're also getting killed. And so sometimes they are too on edge. Are we, misdirecting the conversation or focusing on one but not the other?
Indeed, it needs to be a conversation about both, and we need to look at how do we support our police officers, and that is definitely something that I would encourage the police union to take up more seriously. The role of employee health and wellness and ensuring that police are debriefed properly, that there's a duty of care both to them so that they can in turn show their duty of care to the citizens who they serve. If we don't look after our police officers, both their mental and physical health, we ensure that their shift work is structured in a way that gives them time off and they can recoup and recover. That's in addition to the resourcing that needs to be properly done and making sure that we have a structured command who speaks about and ensures that there are tolerance levels and respect for human dignity, not respect for human rights, because rights can be curtailed. It's the dignity that is afforded to them as public servants, and more importantly, them as public servants to us as the citizens who they serve. So we need to have a conversation with the emphasis on both officer health and safety, including them serving us in a way that upholds our dignity and respects our right to life.
Yeah. Lisipa, do you think we are attracting the right people to the police service? Is it a very rudimentary approach to say, if you're looking for a job, there you can go to a police college, get some training, and Bob's your uncle, you become a police officer, you carry a firearm, you went through the competency, and then you are an officer. Is the question perhaps not about the type of people we are attracting to the service?
In policing, remember, it is a calling. It is not just a job. It is a calling, because when you sign that oath, when you take the oath to say you will serve, you will protect everyone, you will ensure that property is secured, you will ensure that the inhabitants of the Republic are secured as well. So that is a calling on itself, more than it is about one saying that they're getting an employment. And to answer directly to what you are saying, we believe that the South African Police Services continues to attract the right target, those members who will join and come and be employees of the South African Police Services. Of course, there would be those who would be coming in, definitely because maybe they are just looking for employment, definitely because some, they have other sinister motives to say, it is better for me, to be in the police and be able to do even criminal activities. So those elements are just few elements that are there, but the overall membership of the police are those who are there because they understand the pain that they went through during the training, because the physical part thereof and the psychological part thereof, it is not as simple in nature. So we are strongly believing that the police continues to attract, and as we speak now, we've got the 10,000 who are in college now. We've seen during the lockdown when that training was suspended because of COVID, many of them were calling us, and in terms of what they were saying and writing to us, they say, you know what, I have this passion to be in the police so much. It was not because of just addressing the issue of unemployment, but we have young people and even old people who are so passionate to serve in the police within this country.
I hear you, Lisiba, but I'm not sure if I'm entirely convinced if there is a general, scenario for the police service. Danielle, how do you feel about this? Do you think that, we are attracting people with the right acumen for the police service, that they truly wholeheartedly believe they're there to protect and serve?
Unfortunately, training and recruitment within the police service is not an area of specific expertise for me. What I can say is that when police officers leave the academies with the best kind of practice having been hopefully instilled in them, the first days on the job and the realities of being inducted and encultured through the cultures at a police station at the precinct level is very often where the most serious dismantling of the ethics and of the values that the police should aspire to is seen, in my opinion. And this is, again, coming back to the ascendancy that these police officers that are often the most highly decorated, the ones that bring in the best results, whose performance are highest, happen to be the ones that are erring and operating in the grey area between legality and illegality in terms of getting those results, and are the ones that are celebrated by the management. And so for me, I think there's a definite need to be looking at how well new recruits are supported on the job and whether there is a counterbalance to some of the negative tendencies and traits that they might acquire through osmosis of just being on the job under some of these.
Yeah, and so on that point, let's try to understand how we foster a relationship between community and police, and we'll get into that after the break. We're talking about police brutality, and the reality is that this program is skewed largely to looking at the relationship between the police and communities. But on the flip side of this, and as one of the guests said a bit earlier, we need to maybe talk about the high intense scenario involving police officers, because the reality is, we sit elderly with a situation in certain circumstances where a police officer goes into Manenberg, and the police officers, they're going to protect and serve the community of Manenberg. That police officer is going to arrest a drug dealer or a known thug that is holding a community to ransom. But instead, the observation is that the community turns on said police officer because, well, they come to the protection of those that are terrorizing an entire community. Why is that the case? Is there a breakage here between community relations and that of the police service?
Well, it's that, and the fact that those who are part of organized criminality and occupy a position within a community use their ill-gotten gains to engender a sense of dependency and a sense of compliance from our communities by paying, resourcing, and actively recruiting members of the community to do their bidding and to come to their defense. So police also have to offset that sort of benign welfare in addition to strengthening the image of the police, public confidence in the police, and public trust in the police. And that's an ongoing thing. We forget that police don't deal with incidences. They deal with history, and they deal with legacy, and they deal with the future, which is something that should start at a beat patrol officer level. And this is where getting back to your recruitment. Does an 18-year-old or even a 25-year-old, especially male, have the maturity and the intelligence and the soft skills to be able to work adequately with communities and build a mature working relationship? Some of us contend no. That takes life experience to get to that point. So maybe we should be recruiting police officers from 25 years onwards. And just to take a little sort of sideswipe at what something the minister said earlier about people with tattoos. And I was saying on an earlier program that people with tattoos often have a tattoo for a reason, and it shows that a particular life milestone in their life and their lives have been reached. They've reflected on it, and they can bring that maturity to the job. So we do have to consider what is it that the everyday police officer is doing to engender that trust. And then they should be working in the fields, getting back to our recruits. And even just your constables should be working under field training officers. And for too many years, the field training officer program in South African Police Service have been dormant or non-existent at all. And that's a problem. Yeah. Leseba will tell you the impact of that we're not taking senior officers who are mature, who have walked a bit, who have reflected on their practice, to be the mentors and guides of candidate officers who should not be given their license until they've completed their 2-year stint, have been assessed, and then only get the license to actually be and the letter of authorization as a police officer. Otherwise, they should just be let go, and we consider the public investment in them, and we've sent out into the world somebody who is a dedicated citizen.
Yeah. And on that note, Leseba, let's become honest. Somebody that can facilitate how to manage, for instance, a crowd, how to manage, the on-the-ground circumstance and the environment that confronts the police officer. But also, to my earlier question to Aldred, how do we get a sense of trust and communication, with police, and that is community and police, that when matters arise, that, there's a degree of ownership and trust and confidence that the community would have in the South African police services?
The police on their own cannot succeed, cannot manage policing in this country. The moment we accept that fact that police in the communities, they need one another. The role of the Community Policing Forum, it plays a very critical role in ensuring that and mending the relationships, and also building the issue of trust, where you find that in most cases there is a trust deficit between our communities and our police. If we have the Community Policing Forum, that would indeed play its role and leave this thing of being politicized. That on its own, it will really cement the relationship between our communities and also even the police. Imagine there is something like a protest. Community leaders are there. The police, when they get there, they speak to community leaders, and community leaders, they themselves, they are able to speak to community members. You'll find that even a sense of violence and destruction of property, there is no need for that to occur. And there is no need for rubber bullets and stun grenades and so on for those to be applied. So I think it is what is at the center of this relationship. It is the issue of the community realizing that they need the police, and the police realizing that we need communities. And anyway, the police are members of the community. They are not coming from anywhere, but they also come from the communities. So that relationship needs to be mended through Community Policing Forum, and it will really take the country forward.
Yeah, and Danelle, I understand that, of course, you monitor crime and policing from a certain distance, and you spoke about your days and confrontation with the police, public order policing. But I'm just quite curious to understand whether, at the moment, we could sit with a scenario that we reimagine how the police functions and operates, and how we begin to get communities to feel, and even those that do go and happen to march, be it to a legislature or to parliament, that when they do so, that the police is their trusted partner and the police would act in similar kind. Do you believe that there is a way for us to manage and fester a different culture altogether?
Yeah, I think it's evident from statistics that are available through the Victims of Crime Survey that there's been a deficit and a decline in community relations with the police and community trust with the police, the public trust in the police. And I think that is a real affront upon the ability of police officers to function not only in their jobs and in their duties of holding the community safe, because, of course, information, proper crime investigation is premised on information that you get from the communities, and that safety of police officers themselves are compromised through this trend of a lack of trust and therefore protection within the communities that they function. But I think there's a deep irony associated with the response, which is one often of escalating and deepening that entrenched distrust through misconduct in the unnecessary and illegal, often misconduct, violent misconduct in the day-to-day execution of policing duties as a compensation for the discomfort, fear, insecurity that police officers feel in the daily execution of these duties. And so I think there's an imperative for the police, as much as there is for the communities, to bridge this gap and this divide and to turn the tide on this distrust which has become such an evident feature of policing, specifically in working class communities.
Aldred, I want to wrap up with you very quickly. How do we strike a balance here, if a balance is ever required? And this particularly on police brutality, but more so, beginning to just quickly wrap up in a minute or so, on Nisiba's point that, without community, policing is not going to work, and policing isn't the only solution to be it crime or even other societal issues. Just in quick summary, what do you think is required in the immediate?
Absolutely. And in the immediate, we need to bring the conversation back to not necessarily to mass protest, but to my day-to-day engagement with the single police officer as an individual citizen. If in that we show mutual respect and regard, police show the ability to listen and be empathetic, and to ensure that they start with those very small and incremental steps to show a humane side to policing, to show a concern for my need, and to uphold my dignity and my right to excellent service, then we can already begin to say, by the time that we come to a public protest where I'm standing with my neighbors, I look across and I see Constable X. I understand that I have a relationship with him, and I'm more able to then walk up to him and say, hey, help us here. When I came to you for help, this is what happened. Then we also need to encourage the institution of the South African Police Service, getting back to our point that Daniel made earlier. What do we recognize, what do we affirm, and what do we reward when it comes to police excellence? We really do need to revisit that and ensure that those officers who show the soft skills of caring, being humane, and not having complaints against them, and be able to show that they have the trust of the community, that is to be rewarded.
And after all, it's a job, and let's do excellently at the job and the work that we do. But fundamentally, in the broader sense, it's to protect and to serve. On that note, we shall close it here for today. Thank you so very much for tuning in. Until we chat again, have a lovely day.